different folks in different parts of the country have totally different conceptions of what it means to be an American. Some people even say being an American means you were born in North, South, or Central America, so everyone is an American. Therefore, it's really America today is very much a country without an identity, to an extent that you don't see in Europe, even countries in Europe that have gone through extreme demographic change, with the exception of Germany. Germany, I think, is a country about as identityless as the U.S., if not more so. And obviously, that was done because it's a form of atonement for Nazism. So people essentially looked at Nazism in Germany. They said, well, any form of patriotism is bad, and they ran in the opposite direction. And in America, it got to the point where multiculturalism and other stuff made it uncool to sort of embrace the old Anglo traditions, and other things were emphasized as a result, and that meant that people had nothing to bind them together. And there have always been divisions in American society, even when there was a very strong Anglo-centric macro culture. So the lack of that culture today, in many respects, has just made these divisions more apparent. So I just don't see there as being a strong American national identity today that people could rally around. I really don't. You know, the honest truth is that if California were invaded by Mexico, a lot of people in Alabama and Mississippi would be cheering, and they would really be cheering. Likewise, say if Mobile, Alabama were attacked by Cuba, and Cuba wound up occupying Mobile, and they crossed over to Mississippi and they got Biloxi. A lot of people in Washington State, in Seattle, would be cheering. They would be. And that's because the national identity of this country has become that.
Well, Donald Trump just came out of the blue in 2015. I never thought he had a chance until I watched a rally that he did in Alabama in something like August of 2015.
Mhm.
I just started watching it, and I saw his plane. They showed his plane circling to land, and suddenly, just looking at his plane, I started to get and then
Mhm.
watching the pageantry unfold and the screaming people, and then Jeff Sessions coming on stage, and then Donald Trump talking about the power of genetics. And I was all a quiver. I was like Chris Matthews. I felt a thrill running up my leg. It was like, whoa, I'm not somebody who cares about politicians. I've never enjoyed watching politicians' speeches. I've never cared about political pageantry that much. But Donald Trump somehow was able to tap into something primal. And I remember his last rally in the 2020 campaign when Mike Pence, I think, just gave a beautiful prayer in, I think, Lansing, Michigan. And that last rally where I had this doom sense that the Trump presidency was over, and I had a few tears watching that final rally. He was able at times to tap into something primal,
No
not just
question.
me, but in millions of people. And the Make America Great Again movement, the devotion that millions of people had to that movement, I think reflects that there is still a national feeling out there that can be stimulated. I think Tucker Carlson taps into it at times. And so a wise, smooth Kenny operator with pageantry skills can possibly tap into it again, and all sorts of identities are latent, waiting to be made active. I mean, think about the person who's been sexually dead for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. They have a sexual interaction, and suddenly they're a sexual being. They are completely transformed. They've got sex on the mind. They're having regular sex. Their identity has completely changed. Prior to this, they were just a stockbroker with a whole bunch of obligations. And now suddenly they feel alive because some part of themselves, which was dead for 15 years, has overflowed like a volcano. And that can also happen with nationalism, though I also take your.
No, it absolutely can happen with nationalism. I will say that what you say about the sentiment which Trump conveyed, it's absolutely correct. It did happen. But I don't think that's really a national sentiment. I think it's a nostalgic sentiment for an America that did exist culturally nationwide during the time of, say, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think that it is something about a memory that people have of America rather than the America which exists today. And one should also note that the sort of nationalistic sentiment which Trump absolutely did awaken in people and also perpetuate within them, it was something that alienated a greater number of people because of, even though we have different views on the legitimacy of the election in certain states, we both agree that there's no question Joe Biden beat Trump massively in the national popular vote. And so I think that the nationalism which Trump represented, the nationalistic sentiment which you speak of, absolutely it's there, but it's not really nationalism. It's really something of a cultural memory that only applies to certain regions of the country. Not even in many cases, they can't even say a region, more like certain counties within states within a region of the country. So it's really an interesting matter. I don't think it's enough to provide a sort of broad-based, left-right spectrum-based agreement on American culture or identity going forward, what Trump represented, but certainly he did tap into something profound. And I think really it's rooted in nostalgia for what does seem to be nowadays a better time.
No, I think he squandered many of the emotions and devotions that he brought out. So by being so childish, so petty, he was undercutting the transcendent magnificence and primal power of his message. So it's a shame that he was such a flawed. At the same time, he was also a master of pageantry. So I think much of the opposition to Trump was not in opposition to the nationalism and the pageantry, but it was in opposition to his erratic, childish, egocentric, and unappealing, petty aspects of his character.
I think that if you look at what the Democrats brought out at the 2020 DNC, it's clear that they did have an opposition to anything beyond Trump, but to the sort of sentiment that he was conveying, that pageantry. I think they absolutely, in their aesthetics and in the philosophy behind those aesthetics, I think the Democrats really dislike that sort of traditional Americana, what I call Norman Rockwellian America perspective. And I think that it absolutely appalled people. I think people on the left and the right make too much of Trump as an individual. Really, Trump is a creation of the times in which we live. At least his political career, his business career was a creation of a time gone by. But his political career is the creation of this era, and it's an era of polarization. And so, "Make America Great Again" was perceived, regardless of whether it's him or somebody else saying it, by people who like the idea of going back as something good, as something positive, as something wonderful. But then again, people on the left perceived it as something bad, something awful, because they dislike where this country has been. And when you have a country that polarized, you cannot have a coherent national identity because it's a hot and cold kind of thing. And obviously, the two are not going to meet with any degree of.
Well, I think that the Trump showed a winning formula for Republicans going forward, and so if someone competent takes his formula, I think they could achieve great things. Like if Ted Cruz were competent and he was able to use Trump's formula and he got into power, he may well be far better at governing than